Until the summer that changed everything, the people of Whitler Valley treated the River Eris the way a family treats an old genial uncle, fondly yet with comfortable neglect. It was background music, something that shimmered at the edges of picnics, powered the antique mill museum, and lent its name to the high school soccer team. Farmers grazed dairy cattle near its bends, anglers flicked lures through its riffles, and teenagers left snack wrappers wedged between its stones. The Eris obligingly carried away fertilizers, silt, and the harmless-seeming debris of modern leisure. Then, on the second day of June, the river wrote its first word. Samira Kane Whitliff's only hydrologist, recently returned from graduate school in Melbourne, spotted the letters from the sky. She was riding in a survey plane mapping seasonal shifts for the Provincial Water Authority when an elbow of turquoise water gleamed into view beneath her window. The Eris's floodplain had always snaked like a pale ribbon, but now its new meander looped precisely enough to resemble the letter T. Below it, another graceful curve mirrored an R. Then, unmistakably, an E and an A. Finally, where the river bent sharply southward, a D took shape. T-R-E-A-D. Samira blinked, leaned across the aisle to the window, then snapped photographs with trembling finger. The word lay across 3 kilometers of valley floor, each letter several dozen meters high. The surfaces trimmed by reeds and pebbly shoals, as though deliberate landscaping crews had been at work. But Samira had studied the projected flow maps. No dredging permits had been granted, no backhoes roared at night. The river had, apparently, rearranged itself. By evening, a mosaic of drone footage flooded local social media groups, aerial shots of the word, commentary ranging from reverent awe to prank conspiracy theories. A veteran geometry teacher posted measurements proving the letter's symmetry. A conspiracy blogger announced that alien graffiti artists had chosen Whitliff as their canvas. But a majority opinion slowly coalesced. This was no prank. Something beyond ordinary hydraulics, beyond human heavy machinery had guided the Eris's course. The next morning, a second word awaited. Lightly. The new bends nested just downstream from tread, the curves so fresh that flecks of damp soil shone in dawn's light. Tread lightly. The phrase spread like dandelion seeds. Local papers printed special editions, national news vans clogged roadside pullouts, aerial tours brought thrill seekers who craned from helicopter doors, waving phone cameras while the letters glinted below like calligraphy. Yet even amid excitement, an undercurrent of unease shivered through the valley. Was the river issuing instructions, a warning, or merely expressing whim? Mayor Corin Booth convened an emergency town meeting in the high school auditorium. Samira presented her images and hydrological data, concluding, "The Eris resculpted its own channel. We can't explain it with rainfall, subsidence, or seismic anomalies. We are witnessing a phenomenon without precedent in fluvial geomorphology." Hush followed, then a low, incredulous whistle from the back row where farmers congregated. "Could this be dangerous?" asked Elias Rowan, a second-generation dairy farmer whose pastures sidled the river's broadest bend. His question carried the pragmatic weight of someone whose livelihood depended on predictability. Samira hesitated. The new channels formed without flooding nearby fields. But if the river continues altering course, we must adapt quickly. Erosion, groundwater shifts, infrastructure, everything could change. Mayor Booth rapped her gavel. "For now, neighbors, our best response is vigilance. We'll coordinate daily monitoring." And she glanced at the drone photographs projected behind Samira. "Perhaps we should listen." A murmur rippled through the auditorium, half scoffing, half hopeful, because even the most skeptical resident had to admit the phrase "tread lightly" resonated with Whitliff's conscience. Over decades, incremental choices had crept toward excess. Fertilizer runoff produced algal blooms each August. Plastic litter collected in eddies. The once dense riparian forests stood thinned by informal logging and riverside development. 3 dawns later, another shift occurred. This time the shape was shorter, easier to read even from the riverbank footpath. Share. A group of early morning joggers stopped in their tracks as the word materialized beneath a low mist, the water gliding through curves so clean it might have been poured from a calligrapher's pen. Word spread again. More townsfolk made the pilgrimage to vantage points, jaws slack at the spectacle. By the week's end, the sequence read, tread lightly, share, restore. It was as though the river had become a living scroll, unrolling commandments carved not in stone but in liquid motion. Samira camped on a bluff above the newest bend, scribbling notes while portable sensors hummed beside her. The heiress's velocity data showed minute but constant adjustments, redirecting volumes of water with near surgical precision. She half expected to spot submerged bulldozers or a clandestine dam upstream, yet none existed. No tremors registered on seismographs. Wind patterns remained ordinary. One night, while Samira stared over the moonlit water, Elias Rowan climbed the bluff carrying a thermos of coffee. "Can't sleep," he said, seating himself on her tarp. "Keep hearing that word restore rolling through my head like a stone in a plowshare." Samira poured half the coffee into her tin mug. "Same. Been thinking," Elias said. "If the Aris can shift like this without drowning us, maybe she's telling us we should shift too. My grandfather laid tiles to straighten a side channel so he could expand pasture. We could dig that section open again, let reeds reclaim it." Samira set the mug down. "You'd sacrifice acreage?" He shrugged, gaze fixed on the luminous letters below. "Maybe it's not sacrifice. Maybe it's rent overdue." 2 days later, Elias's excavator reopened the old side channel, breaching a thin berm. Brown water nibbled through, then rushed in with a satisfied gurgle. Dragonflies spiraled above fresh puddles. Frogs discovered refuge within hours. Drone hobbyists captured the site, posting videos titled, "Farmer Partners with Miracle River." Within a week, other landowners volunteered similar adjustments, removing livestock fences near banks, converting rows of monoculture corn into buffer strips of willow and dogwood. The river rode again. Men's soil give back. That was when 15-year-old Leo Sanchez, a self-taught coder, created riverwordstracker.com. The website overlaid satellite imagery with timestamped phrases, inviting residents to log sustainability pledges beside each word. Within days, pledges bloomed. A restaurant promised to compost food waste. The school board voted to install solar panels. Retiree Alice Yoon committed to repairing 50 old bicycles for free distribution. Media coverage intensified. An environmental think tank proposed turning Whitliff into a living laboratory of eco-conscience. A glossy magazine profiled Mayor Booth as steward of the speaking river. While some locals enjoyed newfound fame, others bristled. One evening at the Rusty Pike Tavern, a logger named Mitch Gaines slammed his pint down. "I don't need water telling me how to live," he spat. "Folks been harvesting timber here since before my great-granddad." A few murmurs of assent rose, but they sounded weak even to their owners' ears. Summer deepened. The valley's usual haze of lawnmower exhaust faded. Now the air smelled of sap and soil. Children organized litter brigades voluntarily. Teens painted murals on the river's phrases on the abandoned feed-in grain silo. The heiress responded with new words, shorter now, almost playful. Spro, swim, repeat. Each unveiling felt celebratory. Couples set picnic blankets on overlooks at dusk, wagering what the next word might be. When circles appeared, a circle dance erupted spontaneously on the Riverwalk, led by the high school folk dance club, who scarcely needed a pretext to unleash accordions. But every story with enchantment courts a shadow. That shadow arrived in the form of Bright Source Holdings, an energy conglomerate with a pending permit to build a bottling plant upstream. The company had quietly purchased forest acreage the previous year, envisioning profits from pristine, sustainably sourced mountain water. As Whitliff's notoriety grew, so did Bright Source's optimism that a marketing campaign could ride the mystical river's fame. Bright Source representatives scheduled a town hall presentation promising jobs and revenue. They dangled figures that would double the municipal budget, renovate the dilapidated community center, fund scholarships. On the evening of the presentation, sleek infographics glowed on a portable screen. A man in an expensive charcoal suit clicked through slides, soothing our extraction will be less than 1% of annual discharge. Impact? Negligible. Samira, arms folded, whispered to Elias, 1% upstream means lower flow where the heiress is shaping letters. A rounded bend requires water mass. Even a small change could stop the writing. Mayor Booth opened the floor. Leo Sanchez raised his hand first, voice wobbling through puberty's scaffolding. "Will you pledge transparent data about withdrawals? And what happens if the river asks us to stop?" Muffled laughter. The Bright Source rep tilted his head politely. I don't believe rivers ask. Nature is a resource to be managed wisely, certainly, but it doesn't talk. Just then, thunder shook the windows, a startling coincidental punctuation. Rain hammered the roof, metal creaking under the sudden torrent. The power flickered, projector sputtering out. In the darkness, uneasy murmurs rustled like wind through grass. When emergency lights glowed, the rep cleared his throat, resumed pitch, but the spell had broken. At dawn, the storm subsided. Samira drove to her monitoring station and found the river swollen but calm, its surface flecked with storm-tossed sycamore leaves. She clambered onto a boulder, scanning the new contours. Overnight, the heiress had carved a fresh admonition. Stop it lay less than a mile downstream of the proposed plant's intake point. Mayor Booth summoned the council. We've been given a clear directive, she said, her voice tight, but procedure required a vote. The next evening, residents packed the auditorium again. Pro-plant signs jostled anti-plant banners. The logger, Mitch Gaines, spoke passionately for economic opportunity. A nurse described how hospital equipment needed upgrading. Yet every argument met the looming counter-presence of that word, stop, projected on the screen behind the dais. Drone photo, time-stamped, 6:04, Ironman council members cast ballots, 3 for the plant, 4 against, permit denied. BrightSource threatened lawsuits, but public pressure swamped their legal team. Investors withdrew. Within a month, the corporation retreated, citing unforeseen geological instability. Whitliff celebrated with the first annual River Festival. Wooden kiosks sold mushroom loaves, bee-friendly honey, furniture built from reclaimed barnwood. Children launched miniature rafts that read "Thank you" in pastel chalk across their sails. Fireworks remained silent. They used glowing paper lanterns instead, drifting skyward like luminous seeds. Autumn's first crisp morning found Samira walking the riverside trail. Golden poplar leaves spiraled in slow descent. She paused where the river had written "stop," tracing the gentler flow now burbling through a newly formed wetland. Otters popped sleek heads above cattails, curious eyes shining. The letters still persisted, but were softening. Edges blurred by sediment, as though the heiress, message delivered, allowed time's natural erosion to reclaim the script. Days shortened. The heiress wrote less frequently, delivering single words spaced by weeks. Each felt like a seasonal envoy. Gather, share, again, but this time the bends darkened with migrating salmon, as if the word itself held fish in its curves. Winter arrived in thick snowdrifts that muffled sound. Under a pale solstice sun, Samira hiked to her gauges, icicles fanged from branch tips, river running black and strong beneath. A fresh word shimmered where ice rims met open water. Trust snow flurries dusted the letters like powdered sugar. Samira knelt, touched the frozen bank, and felt something akin to prayer, though she had never been religious. Trust. The valley had begun trusting, not passively, but in the active sense of stewardship that wove neighbor to neighbor, human to water. The municipal compost program harvested 8 tons of organic waste that year. Elias's reopened side channel now teemed with reed warblers and minnows. He diversified his dairy to artisanal cheese sold at farmers markets. The high school science club, guided by Samira, built a micro-hydro turbine that lit the Riverwalk's night lanterns using the heiress's own current energy, borrowed and returned. Spring thaw surged in April. Meltwater thundered off alpine crags, slamming downstream faster than forecasts predicted. Samira's gauges screamed warnings of a potential 100-year flood. She raced to town hall as sirens wailed. The valley braced. Sandbags piled. Emergency shelters opened. Yet, amid scramble, the river again bent to its cryptic labor. Helicopter crews monitoring the floodplain radioed down. The heiress is redirecting into oxbows, whole volumes sliding into old channels reopened last summer. Those restored wetlands, previously swampy backwaters, were now sponges. They absorbed wave after wave of runoff, slowing the crest. Still, water pressed hard toward town, where concrete embankments narrowed its course. Samira studied maps and gasped. "We have to breach the old freight yard wall," she told the mayor. "Let the river reclaim the floodplain." The freight yard, abandoned since rail lines rerouted, stood on slightly higher ground, its derelict warehouses a resting place for feral cats. But a thick retaining wall shielded the lot from river overflow. Samira proposed cutting a deliberate breach, allowing water to fan out harmlessly across empty acreage rather than slam against downtown storefronts. Madness, some counselors muttered. What if warehouses collapse? Elias stepped forward. Better warehouses than homes. Civil defense crew revved excavators. Locals hefted pickaxes. In pelting rain, they smashed a gap, bricks caving under muddy water that surged in relief, filling the yard, swirling among rusty tracks like a charger finally given pasture. Pressure on downstream levees eased. By dawn, the river stood high but stable. Downtown remained dry. When helicopters lifted after the storm, observers saw a new sentence etched across the widened floodplain and the soggy freight yard together. Letters shaped not solely by water, but also by humans standing thigh-deep, guiding sandbags to accentuate curves. Somehow, amid urgency, residents had arranged themselves as living strokes, letting the eras complete loops around them. The phrase, captured in grainy rescue footage, read, "Give back." It reverberated on news broadcasts worldwide. Commentators debated whether the river had orchestrated the moment or whether Whitliff's people had become co-authors. Most locals felt the distinction no longer mattered. Collaboration was the point. The flood receded, depositing nutrient-rich silt. Community volunteers sowed willow cuttings in the saturated freight yard, christening it Give Back Green. The warehouse's skeletal frames transformed into open-air pavilions for markets and concerts. Graffiti reading "Flood brought fertile ground." Months rolled into a balmy summer. The River Words Tracker website recorded its 100,000th pledge. A tourism company offered carbon legal rafting and river lore workshops. Yet the heiress's script now slowed, as though the message cycle neared completion. On Midsummer Eve, families picnicked along the restored floodplain. Fireflies winked while fiddles played. Children waited knee-deep, eyes scanning for alphabetic hints. A hush fell around midnight when ripples outlined a fresh shape near the original T of tread. Older letters had blurred with time, but the new ones gleamed. The R's curled in elegant arcs, forming a final message composed of 2 words, each pulse of water emphasized by moon sparkle. We're one. Some insisted the apostrophe shimmered by illusion. Others swore it was as crisp as ink. Regardless, no one doubted the meaning. The river had moved past imperative to identity-declaring interconnectedness rather than dispensing orders. In the weeks that followed, no new letters appeared. The Arisa resumed ordinary meanders. The residents noticed it maintained many restoration channels, as if satisfied with its revised geometry. Samira archived terabytes of data and drafted papers that would upend textbooks. Yet she found more pride in the living laboratory outside her office window. Kids counting macroinvertebrates, retired mechanics building rainwater harvesters, anglers catching trout in numbers unseen for decades. Elias hosted a solstice feast on his now-budget field. Goat cheese, heirloom tomatoes, beer brewed with river-cooled coils. Samira stood beside Mayor Booth, watching the heiress glisten under lantern light. She mused aloud. "Do you think the river's finished speaking?" The mayor smiled, lines at her eyes soft. "Maybe. Rivers don't speak with words forever. Maybe once they're heard, they sing." A distant chorus of frogs answered, as if on cue. Down by the water, Leo Samir skipped stones. Each skip campaigned across the mirrored sky, tiny circles widening. The ripples touched reeds, then the bank, then burrowed under the hull of a docked canoe. They vanished in silence. Yet Samira sensed their echo traveling, subtle but inexorable, through every molecule of valley water, then into soil, trunk, leaf, lung. A small, shared vibration, were one. It occurred to her that perhaps rivers always tried to tell humans this secret. Only in Whitliff, through a miracle of shifting silt and collective readiness, had people finally managed to read it. The Aries flowed on, unhurried, no longer spelling instructions, yet inscribing lessons with every eddy. Tread lightly, share, restore, mend, soil, give back were one. The phrases lingered, invisible now, but etched in daily choices, in the tone of town hall debates, or in a farmer's willingness to surrender pasture, in the hush that descends whenever a bottle clinks against the Riverwalk railing and someone, a child, a tourist, an old logger, steps forward to pick it up before it can enter the water. Long after journalists moved on, travelers still arrived, expecting spectacle. They rented helicopters, drones, kayaks. Many left disappointed when no grand letters greeted them. Yet a few stayed long enough to notice otters in side channels, Grand lagers in oversized, bubbly water bottles, compost steam rising behind the cafe, lanterns powered by current, murals weathered but bright, and children tugging sleeves, eager to tell the story of the summer. Their river wrote words that turned a valley into a promise. Those visitors often departed with unexpected tenderness, as though a river's unheard song had brushed their ears. For Whitliff residents, life restored its rhythms, harvests, birthdays, budget meetings. But each dawn, when first light touched the water, they couldn't help searching the surface for nascent loops just in case. And though the Eris ran plain, the valley moved through days with the reverent pulse of a congregation who has once witnessed scripture unfold in mutable blue lines. Sometimes, especially at dusk, Samira Kane would sprint up the old bluff. From there, she could still discern faint ghost curves of heroic letters softening into wetland pools. She would sit, breathing peat and pollen, and listen. No syllables came. Instead, wind rustled reeds, water chattered over stones, and frogs crooned. Contained within those textures, she heard the river's final lesson. Conversation is continuous, but language changes. Having spoken in articulate bends, the Eris now conversed in health-clear water, thriving lilies, the slip of trout under dusk's surface, and that, she understood, was the longest word of all.